The Boston Celtics just pulled off a fantastic bounce-back win against the Bucks in Game 2 and have officially regained possession of some of the momentum they lost, tying the series at 1 apiece heading into Games 3 and 4 in Milwaukee. This game was a polar opposite of what happened in the first game in this series, as the Celtics came out of the gates and punched Milwaukee right in the jaw and seemingly never looked back after they took a commanding lead in the first half. This lead did start to fade as Boston shots slowly stopped falling in the second half, but in the end, the lead they created was far too big for Giannis and the Bucks to climb back from, and we learned a lot of different things about Boston that could affect many different aspects in this series that I will get into in this video. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Grant Williams headlined the efforts from last night, but most importantly, Grant Williams deserves all of the honors of being the MVP in this game, having the game of his life, as not only did he have one of the best nights of his entire NBA career shooting the ball, but he was also the X factor defensively on Giannis, who did a phenomenal job holding his own defending against him, as this could very well be the recipe for the Celtics' success in terms of how they want to play against the two-time MVP, and that was easily the best defensive performance on the Greek Freak all playoffs by any player, and the Celtics are definitely hoping this will continue the more they rely on Grant. Also, only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed, so if you end up liking this video, consider subscribing. It's free and it helps me out a ton. Not only did he emerge as a lockdown defender in this one, holding Giannis to just 5 points in the first half, but he also scored his career high of 21 points, shooting 50% from the field and 66% from 3, as he most certainly is a huge reason why the Celtics won this game. Every possession the two matched up against each other, Grant Williams made Giannis work for everything he got instead of the many easy buckets Boston gave up in Game 1, as he matched Giannis's brute strength and quickness to almost perfection. And although he started to pick up things in the second half and finished the game with 28 points, because of Williams's play against him, you could clearly tell that as the game went on, Giannis was showing signs that he was gassed out there on the floor because of how much effort he needed to put in to get his buckets, which played a huge role in limiting how much the Bucks were able to gain some rhythm in attempts for a comeback in this game. For a player like Giannis and how good he is, this is exactly the type of effort you want to get from someone guarding him, as he will get his points whether you like it or not. He's that type of guy who's the most dominant player in today's NBA, but it does matter how he gets those points and how difficult you make it for him every possession down the floor. And like we saw in this game, it most definitely mattered and ended up being huge for Boston tying up this series. It wasn't even just Giannis that he played amazing defense on, as there were multiple possessions during this game where he had incredible defensive possessions against Drew Holiday and Bobby Portis, where honestly I think this very well could be his breakout game of his career to start taking his game to that next level. He has such a bright future that everyone in Boston is patiently waiting to see what Grant Williams can turn into, as he's just 23 years old and he was even mic'd up during this game, so we got to see his leadership qualities and they looked great. For a large chunk of the season, he ranked in the top 5 in his 3-point percentage, and even though his shooting numbers slightly fell at the end of the season, he was still nearly in the top 10 in the NBA, displaying that he's a sharpshooter in this league, shooting 41.1%. And then of course you have his defense that will only get better the more he plays for this team and gets more experience on the floor. Mark my words, one day he will be in the running for the Defensive Player of the Year award, as he's already shown us so much potential on that end, while he still doesn't even start for Boston yet and hasn't had a season where he's averaged more than 25 minutes a game. Now, enough talking about Grant Williams, as honestly he could deserve a video on its own by how special of a player he's going to become, but now it's time to give Jaylen Brown some love, because his efforts in the first half of yesterday's game gave the Celtics that mountain of a lead, and this was the other half of the story on why Boston eventually would pull off to win this game and tie the series. Brown absolutely took off in the first half of this game, as he was nearly perfect to start off the game, as he had 25 first half points, shooting 90% from the field, and he was perfect from beyond the arc with 2 steals and a block in just the first half alone. And although he slowed down mightily early in the second half, he proved to me that for the rest of this series and however far Boston makes it out in the playoffs, if they beat the Bucks, Jaylen Brown is going to be the X factor for a lot of the Celtics' success for many reasons. Not only were his efforts the difference in this one offensively, but being the second star in this team, depending on if Jaylen Brown has a good or bad game, will and has most likely decided the outcome of the Celtics' fate. Obviously, there are outliers to that point, but being as consistent of a 20-point per game scorer that Brown is for this team, as he's averaged above that mark for 3 straight seasons, when he has an uncharacteristic night where he shoots below that mark, it has a lasting effect on this entire team, and it showed in Game 1. It's no question that Jaylen Brown is Tatum's right-hand man, and with that, it means he often gets weaker defenders given the assignment to guard him, as opposing teams' main defensive attention would be focused on Tatum. And in the first round against the Nets, we saw this on multiple counts where the Nets were having guys like Bruce Brown, Kyrie, and Patty Mills have a shot at guarding Jaylen, and he definitely did not complain about those matchups as he got what he wanted all series long. And when Brown starts to heat up and his game slowly starts coming to him, this forces teams to realize that there isn't just one star on this team, opening up the floor to Tatum getting easier looks as he takes some of the defensive attention off of him, and they sort of now split the attention and so on and so forth for the rest of this roster, where it gets to the point that this leaves multiple other Celtics players wide open, and Brown uses his playmaking ability, which is quite underrated might I add, as he's done a phenomenal job at passing out of double teams, finding his open teammates, and in hand gets the entire team flourishing together. We saw this specifically last night in the first half, where the Celtics were constantly relying on driving to the lane and kicking it out to open shooters when the Bucks would collapse on Tatum or Brown, and it worked to perfection. But moving on to the rest of the team, Marcus Smart was out of this game with a thigh injury, but it's not looking like it's going to set him back all too much. But this was a huge loss defensively and from a playmaking standpoint, as they were very limited in the amount of elite playmaking they had a hold of that showed its colors in the second half of this game. In the long run, if the Celtics want to win this series, they are going to need Marcus Smart back in the lineup. But what impressed me so much about this team is just how underrated both Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are as defenders, being that they are on the same team as the Defensive Player of the Year, a runner-up for that award in Robert Williams, Grant Williams, who I've alluded to all video on just how good he is on that end, and even Al Horford, who's an above-average defender. Brown ranks second in the NBA this postseason in steals, while Tatum is right behind him in third, and this just shows you how good of a defense this team really has when these two guys are considered in the bottom half of this team's starting lineup in terms of defensive ability, as they are two elite defenders of their own. Now, what I've learned from the first 2 games of this series is that the Celtics have decided that they are going to live and die by the 3, as they understand the amount of defensive talent the Bucks have down low that caused them havoc in Game 1 in both Giannis and Brook Lopez. The Celtics have shot 91 threes compared to just 71 twos in the first 2 games of the series, and a huge reason as to why they won Game 2 was because they shot 46% from beyond the arc, which are numbers that are very unlikely to be sustainable throughout a 7-game series, and their inability to hit threes was what costed them the first game. But if they're truly going to want to have a shot at beating the Bucks, they are going to need to figure out how to attack Giannis and Lopez down low to increase their odds of coming out on top and give them easier buckets, rather than relying on nearly shooting 50% from 3 to beat a talented Bucks team. They are heading in the right direction with their defense coming up huge on Giannis that will hopefully carry over to some extent in the rest of the series, but they've had 2 polar opposite games offensively, and that has and will continue to decide the outcome of every game if they decide to keep the same game plan offensively of just trying to win by shooting an absurd amount of threes. But as the series is now tied up at 1 apiece, comment down below your thoughts on what the Celtics need to do to come away with the rest of the series. Let's see how the Bucks respond to the punch they just received as they head home to play the next 2 games on their home court, as this should continue to be an extremely exciting series.